those pointless selfies you take, the thousands of images that eat up your storage? You can thank the cloud for that. No, there aren't actually vast data centers hovering in the sky. It's a physical data center that could be thousands of miles away from you.
And when you think about the billions of people streaming videos, using the internet, even using ChatGPT, all of that space starts to get scarce. And that's why some engineers say we may have to turn to the ocean to store and process our data in the future.
Companies like Microsoft are already working on testing a data center that lives completely underwater.
Back in 2018, Microsoft sank a data center off the coast of Scotland in a first-of-its-kind experiment.
That underwater data center was equal to 864 servers and 27.6 million gigabytes. That's enough storage for nearly 5 million movies and as powerful as several thousand consumer PCs. It also cost Microsoft about $25 million.
But let's back up a minute. What exactly is a data center? It's a physical facility that stores any company's digital data.
It's full of IT capacity, networking, processing power, and storage. And that's what our digital economy and our digital lives, are really heavily rely on.
You've heard of the big tech data centers, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud. Those live above ground across the US and around the world. Their growth and usage has exploded over the past decade.
Along with taking up space, data centers also take up an extreme amount of energy. Research shows data center energy usage has grown roughly 25% a year on average since 2015.
An underwater data center is similar to a land deployed data center, yet it has specific requirements. So, such as it needs to withstand the water from the outside. So it needs to be a sealed environment. It has to have some sort of connection to shore in terms of providing the power as well as the network. And that, is, it's not a trivial task.
The goal eventually is to use renewable energy, like offshore wind farms, to power these data centers.
And the water could just inherently require less energy, a lot of which is used to keep equipment cool. Underwater data centers can use the water's naturally cooler temperatures to prevent overheating.
Increased workloads, specifically, for example, around artificial intelligence, requires different heat removal strategies and liquid cooling in its different forms as it comes in, is a good example as to how we can more effectively reduce this heat.
Microsoft's experiment took years to complete, and it worked. Now other companies are looking at the benefits of data centers underwater.
This is especially crucial following the AI boom, which will cause even more storage needs, requiring more and more data. The big question for tech companies, the money. Right now, some estimates show underwater data centers cost about as much as above ground ones.
It is very challenging for me to believe that a underwater deployed data center could be as cost effective.
But experts say something needs to be done.
Just like you said, Inez, something needs to be done here, and that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. And the barriers might be high, but one company is leading the charge. So joining us to discuss what's next for underwater data centers is Maxie Reynolds. She's the CEO of Subsea Cloud. That company builds underwater data center pods within 12 weeks, and they can be deployed in our oceans for storage. So Maxie, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, this technology is very new. So start us off with your 60-second quick take about how your technology works.
Yeah, okay, thanks for having me. So what's sort of interesting is that it's not actually that new. We have had compute power underwater for give or take 50 years now. The fuel that we get that goes in our cars, that's in our houses, is typically fossil fuel. And so, pipelines, other subsea assets require compute. So our application is fairly new in terms of we're putting, megawatts down into the water, but in and of itself, it's not really that new. But what we actually do is we build, deploy, and maintain these data centers for economic and sort of environmental benefits, and it's fairly cost effective in the way that we are doing it.
And Maxie, Ines here. So you talk about environmental benefits. Talk to us a little bit about that. What is the biggest problem that Subsea aims to undertake here? And why should companies be considering underwater data centers?
Yeah, okay. So by placing them underwater, you eliminate the electrically driven cooling. And so we see about a 40% reduction in the power that's consumed, and so a 40% decrease in the carbon emissions. About, every megawatt hour that we consume creates about half a ton of carbon. So when you put a data center underwater, you reduce that carbon by about 900 tons per unit. So it's sort of interesting to look at it that way from a climate perspective.
Right.
And why companies? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, Maxie, to cut you off. I just wanted to say it sounds like there's a reduction in carbon usage, but there's also a reduction in cost. You say that reduction is about 70%, but some of our sources have said that it's kind of a wash because it's expensive to, say, send someone down to the bottom of the ocean if you need to fix one of these things. How do you justify the wash on cost savings?
So there are actually cost reductions over both the OPEX and the CAPEX. So starting with the OPEX, there are no costs for cooling, right? So that's a big one. And then in terms of maintenance, your maintenance cycle basically is elongated. You have to do less to the servers less often because there's no dust, there's no debris, there's no people jostling the cables, things like that. Those are really the biggest factors in determining when a data center goes down or a server goes down within a data center. So we see that, and then we would never send actual people to do this. So we don't rely on divers. We actually use ROVs, remotely operated vehicles, and they're very cost effective. The biggest cost that we face that you obviously do not face on land is the vessel cost. So what we do there, again, to sort of try and be smart economically, is to take vessels on what are called interruptible contracts. So they're within a sailing radius to a cluster of these units that we place down. And what happens is we say, hey, we need you. We have this maintenance window. They will stop the job, pause the job that they're on, come to us. And we keep those costs down by employing that method.
Maxie, we talked earlier about Microsoft and its test in 2018, but are other companies doing this? Are you working with other companies? Give us a little bit of the landscape of where this sits now, and do you see a future where big tech has underwater data centers?
I do. So let's sort of back into this. I absolutely see that as the future. I don't see it as the only method in the future, nor should it be. We should simply move towards immersion cooling, whether that is underwater or not. I think algorithmically, we are probably going to see a bit of an upsurge in data centers underwater because of latency, which is maybe too down in the weeds for this, but ultimately it's required if we're going to use AI at speed and for other things like high frequency trading, things like that. So yes, it will happen. Microsoft, I think you said at the top of this that they were about $25 million for their initial test over in Scotland. And there's a few reasons for that. One, it was a test, so there's no economies of scale. But the other thing is that there are two ways to allow something to incur the pressure of water. You can make the walls very thick, or you can compensate it from the inside. Microsoft and another company called Highlander, which are Chinese, they make the walls very thick, but there's a sort of skew in the space server coefficient when you do that, because you have to make the walls very thick. The deeper you put it into water. Basically for us, we can deploy at 10 feet or 9,000 feet, although 9,000 feet is a little bit of a flex because there's really nothing down there, but we could, with really little to no technical calculation, varying at those depths. So it's sort of interesting how you get things underwater. You kind of have to be a subsea engineer to really know how to do it effectively. And that's sort of what's missing from an analyst's viewpoint.
Really helpful overview, Maxie. Next time we have you on, I want to talk to you about your ethical hacking background. So we'll bring you back for that. Thank you so much, Maxie Reynolds, Subsea CEO. We really appreciate it. So regardless of where the data storage is happening here, it's clear that the overall industry is having a moment. Allied Market Research projects that the global data center automation market is going to reach $32.5 billion by 2030, and that is, of course, thanks to the AI boom. So we want to talk about how investors should be preparing for this expansion. Here to discuss is Anurag Rana, Bloomberg Intelligence senior analyst. He covers software services and cloud providers extensively. And we're also joined by Charles Myers. He's the CEO of Equinix. And thank you both so much for coming on. Charles, I want to start with you. It's really wonderful to have you because Equinix is one of the world's largest digital data center firms. It's clear that reliance is expanding exponentially, and thanks, of course, to that AI boom that we've been talking about. But high demand can be challenging to reach when it's coming at you at such a fast pace. What would you say is the single biggest thing that your firm is doing to prepare to meet this boom in demand?
Well, I mean, I think we're working with our customers to really understand how their needs are evolving and adapting. And we have the benefit of really, as one of the larger scale players around the world, of having a data center footprint that's highly distributed in 70 markets around the world. And we're really working with our supply chain to ensure that we can provide the the capacity that people need, as they're really, AI is, I think, just another catalyst in what has been a significant multi-year boom in the demand for digital infrastructure. And so for us, I think it's working with our supply chain to ensure that we can put the right capacity in the right places for our customers to meet their demand.
And that surge in demand is great, but it also comes at a cost for companies. Anurag, I wanted to ask you from an analyst perspective, your thinking when you see headlines of, for example, Microsoft investing millions in a test for these underwater data centers. Should investors be concerned about the amount of capital that is required for green energy, so to speak, data centers going forward?
Yeah, no, that's a very small amount in our view. At any given time, AWS is going to spend, let's say, north of $30 billion a year to expand their data center footwork over the next couple of years, let's say, at the least, I would say. Same number for about Microsoft also. So these things are important because as the AI workloads increase, the need for power increases, the need for renewable energy increases. There is so much that needs to be done to make sure that these data centers are far more efficient than before, because I think that's going to be a big cost for these companies, both in the short and the long run.
So as Anurag was just saying, Charles, I want to get your take on that potential solution. I'm not going to ask you directly about your competitor, Microsoft, here, but how would you grade an underwater data center solution? What letter grade would you give to that?
Well, to be clear, Microsoft, we definitely do not view them here as a competitor in this space, very much as a partner. In fact, we play a significant role as large scale players like Microsoft, AWS, Google, et cetera, are architecting their data center footprints around the world, and we play an important part in that. On the topic of Subsea, I think it's very difficult. I would say it's too early to tell grade. I think that it will potentially have applications, I think, over time. In the previous segment, the CEO of that company was talking about the need for distributed infrastructure, that's something that these smaller scale data centers distributed around the world might be able to do in subsea and underwater environments. And I do think there is a need for distributed infrastructure, but as she said also, I think there's a lot of different solutions. And as Anurag just mentioned, the large players are spending massive amounts of money on data centers, ourselves included, and I think they're investing in a variety of technologies that are going to make those substantially more efficient and more scaled. And more traditional technologies, although somewhat early themselves, like liquid cooling to a chip at the chip level or via rear door heat exchangers, those types of things are, I think, going to be much more cost effective in the near term.
And Charles, going off of that, so do you think, some of the solutions? If it's not Subsea, what are some of the more promising ways of conserving energy, of providing green energy for data centers going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's about a number of things. I think power availability, about efficiency, et cetera. And so there's a number of techniques that I think we and others are using to improve the efficiencies of data centers in terms of how they're powered, how they're cooled. Liquid cooling is, I think, going to be a prominent example of the technology that will reduce the costs associated with, traditional air cooling in data centers and make them substantially more efficient. And then I think using, green sources of energy, that are not necessarily only renewable, but renewable sources as well as some non-renewable sources that are still very carbon friendly, and those could include over time, I think, a variety of technologies. For example, I think on-site power generation is likely to be a part of the equation as the data center demand continues to press on the grids. And so I think you're looking at things like small scale nuclear potentially being answers, partial answers to this problem over time.
Good morning. This is Yahoo Finance.
Big news, 3 things that you need to know.
We just got the announcement.
What happens now?
I got a question.
What does success look like?
What was one of the biggest challenges that you faced?
How much does that raise the odds for a recession?
This phase is over. Tell me what happens to the debt ceiling.
Where does generative AI, though, fit into your portfolio?
Talk to us about this diversification and what investors need to know.
And I think it's important. This is the stuff that gets me out of bed, fired up.
What's the gateway? What's the new bridge to opportunity?
Doesn't matter if it's a soft landing or a hard landing.
Big interview. I can't wait.
Supreme Court out with the ruling on President Biden's student debt cancellation.
Right, let's turn now to some recent tech earnings. And they give you information if you watch them closely.
President Bostic, President Investor Gary Gensler, thank you so much.
Part of what Davos is about is sharing best practices, coming forward with ideas, and then enabling those ideas into action.
And I would add that there's more to come on this.
And we keep producing products that help people lead healthier lives.
This is one of those rooms they use to simulate light in space.
Interest rates will come down again. Figure out where your money is going now. You gotta scope that out.
And the numbers really tell the story.
What does all this mean for you?
Keep it tuned into Yahoo Finance.
So Anurag, final minute for us here. How do investors play this space? I know you cover the cloud providers specifically, but any other plays here?
Yeah, I think, frankly speaking, they are the ones who are really one of the biggest beneficiary, as are the co-location facilities like Equinix, because one of the biggest things we'll see is more shift from on-premise to the cloud over the next decade. Even now, after being talking about cloud for almost 20 years, only a small fraction of the workloads are currently on public cloud or even outside their current corporate data centers. But there is no logical reason in our view why a company should, own and maintain their own data centers.
All right, Charles, I can't let you go without asking you about Fed Week. So what's keeping you up more at night these days? The moves of Jay Powell or these energy prices?
Well, probably a little bit of both for sure. I mean, I think interest rates continue to be a bit of a drag on any industry that's capitally intensive, right? And so, but I think we're going to see stabilization there over time, and so we're really focused on this demand opportunity and the energy part of that. But I think both of those things over time, I think, are going to be very solvable. And I think the biggest driver right now is just a huge wave of demand that started with cloud. Was sort of the COVID lit the match on that, and now AI is fuel on the flames. I think of demand overall for digital infrastructure.
All right, thank you so much for that, Charles. Really appreciate it. We've got Anurag Rana, Bloomberg Intelligence Analyst. Anurag, always great to speak with you, and Charles Myers, CEO of Equinix. Thank you both so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
When it comes to the race for AI chips, NVIDIA is dominating the market. But now some of their biggest customers, Tesla, Microsoft, and Amazon, are working to reduce their dependence on the company's chips. NVIDIA rivals AMD and Intel are also developing their own AI capabilities. The goal? To chip away at NVIDIA's lead and claim a chunk of the market for themselves.
NVIDIA is on top of the tech world and leading the AI revolution thanks to prescient investments it made in AI processing years before anyone was talking about ChatGPT. And that's translated into some huge wins for the company and its investors. But NVIDIA is just one company. And as the AI explosion continues to reverberate across the tech industry, major players ranging from Amazon and OpenAI to Microsoft and Meta find themselves competing for all of the chips NVIDIA can pump out. And it's simply not enough. Now a new race between tech's biggest players is heating up, in which they're building their own AI chips that will give them the ability to outwit each other without having to rely so heavily on NVIDIA's chips. This race is setting up to be the next big battlefield in the tech industry. But NVIDIA isn't resting on its laurels. The company is already working on a version of its next generation superchip, the GH200, which it says offers improved technology and will be available through manufacturing partners later next year. NVIDIA's current most advanced chip, the H100, sits in a 10.5-inch graphics card, which is then bundled together into a server rack alongside dozens of other H100 cards to create one massive computer. The GH200, meanwhile, combines an H100 chip with an ARM CPU and more memory. In its most recent quarter, NVIDIA's revenue jumped 101% to $13.51 billion, with data center revenue, the segment that includes AI sales, up a stunning 171% versus the year prior. According to Reuters, some estimates put NVIDIA's AI market share at as much as 80%. The reason? It's not only the developers, it's not only the processors it develops that required to power AI applications, but the complex software necessary to run them as well. And the company is increasingly creating the kind of foundational models that tech firms use to develop AI software, ensuring that its customers stick around well into the future. But with demand surging and chips selling for tens of thousands of dollars, companies like Amazon, Google, Meta, Microsoft, Tesla, and others are increasingly leaning on their own specialized chips to power their AI ambitions, called ASICs, or Applied Specific Integrated Circuits. ASICs, unlike GPUs, are designed specifically for a specific task, such as AI processing. And while they're expensive to develop, they can provide benefits in the long run by using less power and giving companies greater control over the hardware they use to power their AI software. According to the information, Microsoft has been working on its own AI chip since 2019, and in May, Meta announced it was developing its own AI hardware. Google, in August, debuted its latest AI infrastructure, and Tesla is building a supercomputer based on its own chips. And while each of those companies will still need to get their hands on NVIDIA chips for now, building their own hardware could cut into the graphics giant's lead in the long run. NVIDIA is also keeping an eye on its traditional competitors, AMD and Intel. Both companies are working to try to catch up with NVIDIA in the AI race, rolling out their own chips and software designed to better combat the category leader. That said, the AI chip race is still in its early stages. And while NVIDIA is a mile ahead, it will need to keep innovating if it intends to hold on to that lead. And with products like its GH200 Superchip on the horizon, it looks prepared to do just that.
2023 rocked the markets.
NVIDIA, the stock has been on a tear.
Silicon Valley Bank's collapse is the second largest bank failure in the U.S.
Inflation,
mortgage rates,
the diabetes drug, Ozempic.
Now it's time to make bold decisions. Yahoo Finance Invest, the marquee event for investors seeking big ideas and bold decisions. Guided by the newsroom you trust. Don't miss it, November 7th, exclusively on Yahoo Finance.